All right, now we're on to the main event, what we're all here for, which is to hear from Phil Brown and Steven Lamonde about Kestrels and our exciting new Kestrel monitoring project. And Phil, are you the first? You're going first?
I am.
Yeah, so I won't say too much other than that we're really excited that both Phil and Steven are part of the Harris Center. Phil is our first ever bird conservation director who started with us earlier this year. And Steven is an ecologist who is also, has many hats, and one of them is as a Harris Center board member. And we're so excited that they're both with us, and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Brett, and thank you, Susie. It's good to be here with you all in different places, but I've been emailing with a lot of you about Kestrels recently, so it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces and names, meeting some of you for the first time through the virtual world. So thanks for coming out to this rescheduled date. We do have some upcoming field trainings as well that some of you may be part of. Hopefully we'll be able to offer more so everybody can be part of that at some point. But yeah, I'd like to talk about Kestrels tonight, one of my favorite birds. It's on the wall behind me. So yeah, Kestrels are a neat little falcon that live in our area. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to identify them, some of their breeding life histories, their biology, some of the conservation challenges associated with this charismatic species, and some of the opportunities and ways for you all to get involved as community scientists as part of the Harris Center's network. Yeah, Steven will then discuss how to report kestrel sightings through Ebird, so you can be part of that really effective community of community scientists, helping our efforts become even more targeted as we try to manage for this species with the Nest Box program. At the very end, we will be showing a short video clip, and I promise you'll want to stick around for that. So don't tune out before then. If you like cute little fuzzy birds, you'll want to stick around for that one. So with that, I think I'm going to start to share my screen. All right, so yes, the beautiful kestrel. So yeah, as part of the Harris Center's new bird conservation focus, we're looking at ways to look at species that are not necessarily the threatened and endangered species. Typically, New Hampshire Fish and Game has a large role to play with the state's threatened and endangered species. Kestrels fall in a different category. And we're looking at species that are still common in some ways, but have some declining concerns. So it's part of our effort to try to keep common what's common, basically. So we've done that in our past work through observations at the Monadnock Raptor Observatory over the years, with a long data set of monitoring migratory raptors, looking at migration trends, which give us an idea of species populations. Maybe some of you have seen that talk before. And more recently, the cute little bird on the left here, a broad-winged hawk. We've been looking at the region's nesting broad-winged hawks, which are a fairly common species in the summer. And we're finding out new information about them thanks to the use of satellite and GPS transmitters. So now we turn our focus to kestrels, which is going to be one of our flagship species going forward. So a little bit about kestrels first. I have to talk about what they are. Many of you probably know them already. They're a fairly familiar species, especially going back in past decades. So if you've been in the area for a long time, maybe you'll have seen a lot more kestrels in the past. They're a small falcon. In fact, they're America's smallest falcon, and they do range from all the way up in Alaska and northern Canada to the southern parts of South America. So they're completely across North and South America in the available appropriate habitats. The male and female are slightly different in both color and size. Like most raptors, the female is actually larger. It does a lot of the nest rearing and defense, so they have to be a little bit larger. Female raptors can also catch larger prey, so they can specialize at times of year when there's a shortage of prey. But they're actually the size of a lot of what you think hawks usually eat. They're about the size of a blue jay or a robin. The male here on the left is about 9 inches in size. It has this rusty upper back and upper wings, bluish gray on the lower wings, the primaries, and parts of the face and tail. The female, however, is more of a uniform color on the back and wings, kind of that rusty coloration. And they have a a series of spotting and streaking depending on the age on the underside of the birds. They also have this handsome little mustache and rear cap that comes down. Typically, though, these are open country birds, as I mentioned. They prefer grasslands and arid areas across the Americas, and there are about 17 different subspecies that have been documented. All the same species, but different populations. And they have differences such as some migrate, some don't. The ones that we see up in our region, these are all migratory birds that are coming from southern parts in winter. Their prey is comprised mostly of large insects, medium, large insects like beetles, grasshoppers, crickets, and small mammals like voles and mice, and a variety of small birds and snakes, lizards in some parts of their range, some frogs. Pretty rare though that they do eat birds. It's really mostly insects and mammals. It's the mainstay of their diet. There's a neat little fact about kestrels. A study has documented that they will follow trails of urine in voles. They'll see this through ultraviolet light, which is visible to them, that they can follow vole trails to the prey. So pretty cool, something we can't do. And a little bit more about their identification and their timing. When you're trying to identify a bird, you want to get as many facts as possible. You really want to be a bird detective. So start by saying, is what I'm looking at supposed to be here? Is it common? So the seasonality is very important. Usually kestrels are mostly all migratory in New Hampshire now. And the season that we see them is typically in late March when they start arriving back on their territories. That date could be a little flexible depending on weather in the spring. As we know, the weather is highly variable. And again, into the fall, into late October, the bulk of their population seems to leave our area in late September. But occasionally one will stick around as late as November, or even a Christmas bird count in December will pick one up. So, but typically most of the kestrels are here in spring, summer, and early fall. Other guidelines about identifying them, like other falcons, they have these long pointed wings and longish tails. The tails can take a variety of appearances. They can be very rounded, as shown in the photo here down below. That male there showing a lot of blue. They can fan out their tails. They could also keep them rather narrow, like you'll see with the perch birds. So that sexual dimorphism in color, you'll see the color differences and the size differences. When they do perch, though, they like to sit right on top of something very high up, like a tall snag, a dead part of a tree, peak of a roof, a telephone wire, utility wires. These are all good places, and they like to be out in the open because this is where they're doing their hunting from. This is the majority of their hunting is done from perches, so they're more of a sit and wait predator rather than one that flies around recklessly trying to ambush its prey. So they're strategically looking around. They're looking for movement of insects and mammals and small birds from that perch. You'll see their behavior too will give away their identity a lot of the time. Kestrels, like other birds, they have unique behavioral traits that you'll notice. With kestrels, when they're flying, sometimes they do hunt by hovering. So they'll become stationary and flap their wings in place and really just be right over their prey at that point, looking and looking. And so rarely do I ever see them actually come up with something. They do a lot of hover hunting, but the majority of their hunting, again, from the perch. And when they are perched, they do a lot of tail bobbing. So they rock their bodies up and down and wag their tails a little bit. Unlike a lot of other birds that you might see in the same places, like mourning dove comes to mind as one that is actually similar in shape and size. A lot of people confuse mourning doves with falcons, and I'm certainly guilty of that from time to time myself. So, so watching that behavior is key to the identity. And there are a few lookalikes here. Go over some of the falcons of North America that we have that are in the area. Similar in size, the much darker Merlin is very similar in shape and size. It's a little more compact. Its behavior is very different though. This bird is just always on the move. This is more of that ambush predator, tearing through open spaces. Where kestrels are a little more methodical seeming, a little more delicate in their appearance and in their behavior. Peregrine falcon's a much bigger falcon, also with those long pointy wings and the long tail. And occasionally we do see them, especially in migration and near nest sites. And then there are a variety of other raptors that you could confuse them with, like Coopers and sharp-shinned hawks. But once they're on their breeding territories, they really do stick out a little bit more. So we have to talk about threats to raptors because this is a big focus of our work at the Harris Center. Harris Center has for a long time used raptor education as a focus to engage people. Raptors are such an engaging species, group of species, and also really important to monitor. Part of the reason is a lot of them are declining. So half of raptor species globally have declined to some extent, and about a fifth are threatened with extinction right now. Locally, lots of declines right now in our local breeding species, and a lot of it is what we have done. Really, we've altered their habitats, we've put up obstacles in their way, we've directly shot and poisoned them, introduced various species, changing the climate. We have a responsibility here because we're part of the problem, and I know you all want to help be part of that solution. So it's good to understand some of what has gotten us here in the first place. The photo on the right is when raptors were shot out of the sky migrating by, and this would happen until at least the 1930s in the Northeast US. Still happens in parts of the world. So, globally that has made an impact on some species, but luckily the conservation movement of the last several decades have really helped a lot of species recover. We know what it takes to help these raptors in a lot of cases. And we've done that with the bald eagle and the peregrine falcon, which are now off of the state New Hampshire endangered species list. Those birds have had successful recovery efforts. They're still not out of the woods by any means. I think both of those species have fewer than 100 pairs in the state, but that's a long way from zero or one pair like it was a few decades ago. But on this list of a very small list really of breeding raptors in New Hampshire, the kestrel does fall on this list of special concern. So there's a species that we know has had a conservation decline, and we'll talk about why that is. But oftentimes the species on that special concern list don't quite get the same funding and the same attention as the ones that are state threatened or state endangered. So it's somewhat reactive in those ways where we have to spend funding. So it's important to try to keep these species common sooner than later. But I know I'm preaching to the choir, so I'll talk about some other things here in a minute. But you can see peregrine falcon trends over the past 4 decades, really going up from nothing now to about 40 pair of peregrines in the state. Kestrels are kind of going the other direction. Now, using data from the Monadnock Raptor Observatory in Peterborough, at the top, we've seen a slow steady decline over the 15 or 20 year history at PAC with migratory kestrels. And in the east, at hawkwatch sites across the eastern US and across much of the continent, we've seen declines in the kestrel population too. And even more alarming is all the red on this map on the bottom right, showing declines in breeding bird survey data over the last 50 years for the kestrel. All the red shows declining areas in which on these bring bird survey routes, kestrels have declined. There's only a little bit of increase in a couple of small parts of the country and continent. And in a lot of places, we just don't have enough data. And I think, that may be true in some parts of New Hampshire where they haven't been monitored as much, such as our part of the state. But in the Northeast, kestrels have seen about a 93% decline in breeding bird survey over the history of that project. So, okay, so this is part of it, is habitat related. So this is kestrel nesting habitat in New Hampshire, just a handful of places that kind of just generally look like good kestrel habitat. On the upper left is an image from the airport in Swansea, the Dillon Hopkins Airport. Great place for kestrels, but maybe not a great place for kestrels. They get in the way of runways. They collide with planes more than any other species of bird. So airports don't want to manage for kestrels as a result. Agricultural settings are fewer than there were going back several decades, but there still are some larger cattle pastures, which make excellent habitat. Typically, that's very compatible with kestrel habitat. There are typically areas that are a little more brushy that kestrels are finding food, which seems to be one of the limiting factors, is finding those voles and insects. And if it's just a turf grass lawn, that's not going to do the trick. Golf courses, lawns, large monocultures like corn and hay necessarily are not always the best for kestrels, but grazing lands are typically better. Hayfields can be compatible, especially if they have maybe more of a delayed rotation. Some areas that don't get mowed as often. So large fields, though, is one of the requirements. Typically, I think we're looking at 5 acres or more at a bare minimum. But a complex of fields in a given area that adds up to more than that could also be good kestrel habitat in the summer. But that's a big part of why we've lost kestrels the way we have. And kestrels are also what we call secondary cavity nesters. And this term simply refers to the fact that kestrels are using holes that they didn't make for themselves. They're strictly nesting within enclosed covered spaces, whether it be a nest box or a utility pole that a woodpecker made a cavity in, such as a pileated or a northern flicker woodpecker. Even in silos and old buildings and barns, these are choice places for kestrels if there is an available location. But as you can imagine, there are often issues associated with structures like that, close to human contact, and dogs and cats, other things that kestrels could get into and end up drowning in. That seems to happen quite a bit more than you'd think. And on the upper right, there's a large dead tree, which you don't really see those kinds of features as much in agricultural settings. So that's maybe one of the rare large old elm trees in Hancock. I think a lot of us in Hancock probably know that field. And sure enough, we do have kestrels that we have been monitoring there. And maybe we'll get an update on those later on. So yeah, places for kestrels to nest. So nest boxes really replicate this very well, and they can be placed very specifically in the exact appropriate place with landowner permission. So this seems to be the most effective way to manage kestrels. So as a result, we've started this kestrel monitoring project with multiple goals here to raise awareness of kestrel conservation needs, establishing a baseline of where kestrels breed in the Monadnock region. We have a handful of sites from Ebird that we know kestrels are occupying at certain times of the year, but we think there probably is a lot more available kestrel habitat, and that the birds are underreported in many parts of the region. So we're looking to establish a community science-based research project, looking at kestrel nest box occupancy and also productivity eventually, meaning are they using the boxes? If they are they having young? Are the young fledging? So this is an ultimate goal of the project. And that requires a more hands-on approach that Bird Bander can provide us with. And basically the bottom line is to engage with landowners in better stewardship of kestrels and their habitats. This is our focus area, the star in Hancock being where the Harris Center is located. So decided to look at what is defined as the Monadnock Region, which is a pretty large area. It's there's a lot of opportunity here. And right now there's not a lot of kestrel management going on. So I have a few hypotheses that we've come up with here. As I alluded to before, we think kestrels are probably underreported in our region during the breeding season, that there are suitable sites out there that currently lack kestrels because there aren't enough nest boxes in the right places or enough dead trees in the right places, something we can change. And we think that the kestrels would occupy these boxes if we can cooperate with landowners and install nest boxes and be able to manage them over the long term. It does take monitoring and managing these boxes in order to really rear kestrels. The placement is everything. This series of photos shows just a few different options and typical scenarios for what you see with kestrel nest boxes that are put up for this bird. The situation on the left, utility lines, not a great situation for being able to get back there and monitor it. It's great that it's there, it's habitat, but that does tell me that it's probably along a road. Roads aren't necessarily the best location for kestrels because of potential for collision. Also, as somebody who's going to be monitoring these nest boxes and cleaning them out from time to time, and maybe ultimately trying to ban the birds, nobody's going to climb up there on a ladder. This was installed by the power company in Hancock and potentially has a nesting kestrel right now. We're going to try to find out tomorrow morning with our first field training. The other box on the right also has, it's in a great spot. It's had kestrels nesting for several years. This is also in Hancock. I think Steven measured it and it was 0.64 miles apart from the box on Middle Road. So, so potentially there could be two pairs. We're going to try to find out tomorrow. But Mead has been watching this box and it looks like there's a lot of activity of late. So, you know, the problems with being 15 feet up on a ladder, and I won't say it, but I'm not even on the ladder in that photo. So it's not a great situation. The box in the middle is the new system that is not new, but it's new to us. We're fortunate to have partnered with a guy named Steve Wheeler, and he is helping install nest boxes a few weeks ago at several sites in the area. Steve has been monitoring and managing kestrels across New Hampshire for 48 years. He's a retired fish and game biologist, and he's been doing this on his own post-retirement, and has a successful nearly 200 nest box program across the state. A little bit of a black hole in this part of the state though, so we're helping him expand, and he's helping us get going with this nest monitoring program. So Steve built us 3 boxes, showed me the setup that seems to be safer and easier and more effective than the other images that you just saw. It's a pole mounted system. Simple installation. It takes about 10 minutes to put these up. The boxes are pre-built and all the hardware is pre-assembled. So all he has to do is access the field and piece by piece, put it up. 10 minutes, voila, it's up. It's a perfectly designed box for the long term. He's had boxes that have lasted 30 years that have had kestrels breeding them for 30 years without any intervention. So a pretty successful program that is one that we can adopt and expand. So, so that ties a little bit into the future project goals. I mentioned already that we're trying to establish the baseline of breeding kestrels in the region. Steven's going to get into a little bit of that, talking about Ebird and raising awareness about reporting needs. We've already established the nest box program. There are about 15 or so boxes that I'm aware of in the region that are in appropriate habitat that we can monitor. We're hoping to expand that, and I won't throw a number out now, but I think it's quite possible to double or triple that at some point in the next few years. With that, we'll probably have a pretty decent local population of kestrels again. Is he ready? Oh yeah, so let me talk about this here. So this is hot off the presses. This is a habitat suitability model that was created by a grad student from Antioch University, New England. This is from Will Stotzmeyer, who's actually on the Zoom tonight. So thanks, Will, for sending this along and showing up here. So Will created this as a part of his GIS project, basically showing suitable locations, or maybe the 30 most appropriate locations for kestrel nest boxes based on a variety of features that we know kestrels need for their breeding biology. Large fields, distance from roads was calculated, proximity to an abundant food source. In this case, I think it was running water, and a few other factors. I think there were 6 factors that went into it. And this map gives us a great starting point to look at 30 distinct landscapes in the Monadnock region that would benefit from a kestrel box, or that may be suitable for kestrels already. So we have a handful of other sites identified already, but I'm eager to match this map up with what we've already identified based on other modeling and Ebird panning that we've done already. So yeah, I think with that, oh yeah, so I meant to mention here in the green, this is the habitat suitability map. The green is showing high suitability in the region, the red showing low suitability. So likely places in red are either too developed or too forested overall. And the places in green have a larger agricultural or open presence right now. Put it here on the resources page for the moment. And I was going to turn it over to Steven.
Thank you, Phil, for giving us a great background on kestrel biology and conservation and what's being done to help conserve the species in the region. For folks who are registered for this event, if you'd like us to email out you these links to resources and support, let Phil and I know, and we can pass these links on to you. And now I'd like to present on some of the actions that we can take as members of the community to help out with this kestrel monitoring project that the Harris Center is starting. So first and foremost, the most important thing we can do to further this initiative is to record and share our observations. We got started with that tonight in the Zoom chat. A couple people shared out their recent kestrel sightings from around the Monadnock region and a little further abroad, all the way down to Pennsylvania. So keep that up. If you're driving, make sure you're taking notes safely. Maybe note the time, make a mental note, and then when you get home, send us an email. So recording and sharing those observations is most important. That'll get at our hypothesis that kestrels are actually underreported in the Monadnock region. Up next, participate in monitoring projects just like this one. So we're brand new to this. This is our first year with the Kestrel monitoring project, and we're really excited. It'll be a learning process for us and for you, and we hope that by next year we'll have a better idea of what birds are out there, where they are, how many, and how we can improve the project in future years. So I'm really happy that about 30 of you have shown up tonight to learn more about this project, and I hope that the in-the-field trainings will go well this week. And lastly, install a nest box. So we don't have all the details ready for you yet, But through this project, we'll be learning more about which fields are appropriate for nest boxes, what the dimensions ought to be, and how many we can put in a particular field, how far apart they need to be, and all those details. So learning from this project as well as other established projects throughout the northeastern United States, we'll be putting together a comprehensive plan for how you can assist American kestrels in your own yards. So tonight I'm going to focus on this first point, how to record and share those observations. This year, to start with, we'll be collecting American kestrel observations through Ebird, which is one of the largest biodiversity databases in the world. Each year, hundreds of thousands of casual birders and professional ornithologists share their bird sightings with the Ebird database, and it collects millions of observations each year. This was founded in 2006 by the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology and the National Audubon Society. So this map here is an Ebird output. If you sign up, it's a free account, just need a username and password, and it's really simple to submit your data. And so when Phil and I access Ebird data, this is one of the tools that we can use to identify where kestrels have been seen recently. These are kestrel sightings from the year 2022. Every point that is in red has been seen within the last 30 days, and the few points that are in blue were seen earlier in the year, so back in March when the birds were just arriving. You can see that there's a lot of kestrel activity documented in Hancock. That's because birds are present and eBird users are present. So it's a two-factor map that we're looking at here. The kestrels are present, they're getting reported, and there's people out there on the landscape to see them and report them using eBird. So this map is not complete. We know that there's kestrels in other locations on this map, but we need your help to find them and share them with this community platform. So how does eBird work? Well, once you submit your sightings, you can also add additional photos and additional species, like Eric Conti's list here. He also saw a turkey vulture and northern flicker at this particular location. And that's helpful for researchers and graduate students who are looking at other species. The focus for our project is, of course, the American kestrel, but all of your bird observations are valuable and you can submit those through eBird as well. So as I mentioned earlier, Phil and I, this will be our go-to site for looking for recent eBird records of American kestrels, and then noting the spatial and habitat characteristics of those locations. So here are some recent sightings that I pulled together from here in Hancock for this presentation. eBird works both as an online website. So if you don't have a smartphone, that's okay. You can still interact with this data set. If you do have a smartphone, you can download the free eBird app. It comes in both formats for iPhones and for Androids. It works really simply. To enter an observation, you'll need the date, the time. Your phone will automatically grab your location, which is really handy. You enter in the species that you saw and how many of each, and then you submit it, and it gets shared with the broader worldwide eBird community. So there's a lot of great resources to explore in eBird. There's the app and a lot of science deliverables and active research you can read more about. This fall, I'm offering a 4-week workshop on eBird for beginners. So everybody in the Harris Center community will have an opportunity to get to know eBird better for next year. So tonight is just a quick overview about eBird and how it works. I'm happy to answer more detailed questions about it. So a couple of basics. If you're new to eBird, I recognize a number of familiar faces on this call who are a little more experienced eBird users, so feel free to gloss over this. Step 1, create a free account, no charge to you whatsoever. If you do want to make a donation to eBird, it is tax deductible. All you need is a username and a password and email to associate with the account. Step 2 is to download the app to your phone or log in at ebird.org to record your sightings. Step 3 is to submit your first checklist. Checklists are the lists of birds that you're observing at a particular location at a particular time. And for this for the Kestrel project, we're looking at a couple specific things. Date and time is really important. So Kestrels seen at any time of year, any time of day are valuable. This project has a specific focus on breeding Kestrels, so the ones that are arriving in late March and sticking around and raising young through July. So Phil and I can filter your checklist data based on date and location, date and time, as well as location and the species observed. So one of the questions that a future graduate student might like to look at are the habitat associations between Kestrels and American Kestrels, eastern bluebirds, and tree swallows. All birds that utilize large hay fields and pastures. They all raise their young in cavities. But do the tree swallows use smaller fields than Kestrels? So lots of great questions we can answer with this data. I highly recommend that you all, once you've signed up for your eBird accounts, you join the Cornell Lab Bird Academy. This is free to sign up for, and there's some free courses, other courses you can pay for, but my favorite course is the free Ebird Essentials course. It takes 1 to 2 hours to complete. You can do it on your own time, spread it out over a week or condense it into a 2-hour period. This is a great way. It has to learn about eBird and everything that it does, how it benefits science and communities and conservation. But you can also learn all the technical questions and know-how. So if you can't wait for my fall course on eBird, I recommend you get started with this free course called Ebird Essentials, and you'll have access to that once you've signed up for your eBird account. So specific to this Kestrel monitoring program, there's a couple of recommendations that Phil and I have put together for when you're submitting eBird checklists. If you find Kestrels and you're knowledgeable about their ID, note the sex and age if it's known. If you don't know, that's okay. Don't try to make a guess. If you are making a guess, put it in the comments. Note the breeding behaviors. If you can't find a nest, which is common, they're difficult to find, especially if there's not a nest box around. Note if it's carrying food or if it's mating, if it's copulating with a female or another male. Are there young present? So all of these comments and details about your sighting are really, really helpful. Try to put Phil and I in your shoes. When you're out in the field, what are you seeing? We'd like to know as many of those details as possible so we can make an assessment about the quality of that habitat and the likelihood that those birds are nesting at that location or nearby. So in eBird, there's a long list of breeding behaviors that you can choose from. And so in the app or online, you can open up this list and choose the highest one possible. So for example, further down on the list is a pair in suitable habitat. This tells us that there's a male and female present. It's possible that they're a mated pair, and it's likely that they're nesting nearby. So that's a great sign if we see a pair in suitable habitat. A better sign is that a bird has been observed carrying nesting material. This could be usually sticks is what we'll see in this part of the world. And if that bird is carrying nesting material, we know that there is a nest site nearby, and these birds are actively planning on nesting this season. So this year, 2022. And then all the way up at the top of the list, this confirms American Kestrel breeding activity at that location. This is a nest with young. So if you're fortunate enough to see that come late June or July, we'd love to know about these details on your eBird checklists. A couple other of considerations and things that you can put in your checklist comments are prey items, like this large caterpillar here for some sort of swallowtail moth or swallowtail butterfly, I believe. The timing of food deliveries could be helpful. What time of day are they more actively feeding young? All of this information is helpful. Favorite perch locations? Is it the northern corner of the barn? Is it the telephone pole at the top of the hill? Phil and I will try to follow up with your observations and make a visit ourselves. And if there are favorite perches, it would help us find the birds a little quicker when we do show up. Excuse me. Weather can also be helpful. We know that We're more likely to hear and see birds when it's not raining and if it's not a windy day. So if you're out checking a kestrel spot that you know about and it's pouring rain, it's possible the birds are still there, but because it was raining, you weren't able to observe them. They may have been hunkered down. So weather is important, helps us put Phil and I in your shoes when you're out observing. Habitat as well can be helpful. We do have a number of maps at our disposal that tells us the land cover type and whatnot. But if you see an abundance of a certain plant or insect that maybe the kestrels are preying on, all of this information is helpful as well. And additionally, the presence of a nest box. So Phil mentioned earlier, he knows about a dozen or so nest boxes in the region. It's possible there's a couple more out there that aren't documented or aren't known to us. So let us know if you found one and whether or not the kestrels are using it. Here's another view of data that's already been submitted to Ebird from throughout Cheshire County. We have records going back all the way to the 1980s, and as recent as today. Mead, I saw you saw the same kestrel that I did 11 minutes after I did. So it's great to be over documenting some of these birds. We just need to get out and find the birds that have yet to be reported to Ebird. So this is what the data looks like on the back end. You can see the information that's connected or collected via Ebird. We're missing a lot of breeding codes when people submit birds to Ebird. It's often that breeding codes are left out. So those are especially helpful for this project this time of year. And overall, your eBird records will help us identify suitable habitat and potential nest locations, and moving forward in future years of this project, identify sites where we can establish new nest box locations to help fill in those gaps and benefit the kestrel population. I'd like to end on one more slide before we get to the cute video of kestrels. This is another eBird product. These are observations of kestrels, American kestrels, throughout the Western Hemisphere, their geographic range. And this map is possible by eBird users like us. Scientists do not have the time nor the funding to go out and study birds as intensively as community volunteers. And so the dynamic map that I'm about to display is a product of our effort and our contributions to the birding community. So this is a geographic map of the entire range of the American kestrel. I have a zoomed in map for just New England. Now I'd like you to focus on two things as I play this video. First is the relative abundance. This is the color ramp going from light yellow to dark purple. The darker the shade of purple, the more abundant kestrels are. The lighter the shade of yellow, the lower the density of kestrel populations at that location. Now this map is going to scroll through each quarter month of the year, starting on January 4th, which is where our map starts. In not really mid-winter, but early winter and early January, we can see that American kestrels are really densely packed in coastal Texas. This is a strong winter site for most kestrels breeding in the United States and Canada. We also see that down here in Uruguay and eastern Argentina is a stronghold for American kestrels. Now, as the video plays, keep an eye on this gray bar here on the right, and that'll tell you which time of year the map is representing. So what we're about to watch is a spectacle of American kestrel migration throughout the year. I'll play this a couple times. We're now in April. The kestrels are migrating to their breeding grounds where they are through June and July. Come October, they migrate back south to their wintering grounds. So a spring migration coming up. We see kestrels going all the way up into central Alaska. And then come July, August, they're migrating back down to their wintering grounds. So we see that kestrel populations are doing quite well in the Great Plains, large open agricultural areas where there's lots of hayfield and open grasses. Here in New England and in the Northeast, you can really see that these birds are avoiding the Adirondack Mountains, the northern, or the tallest, most green mountains, and the White Mountains. There's too much forest, too much elevation, not a lot of lowland grassland. So as we watch this video play just 2 or 3 more times, keep an eye on southern New Hampshire, southeastern New Hampshire. It's a stronghold for kestrels, especially during migration, as well as the Connecticut River Valley snaking up between Vermont and New Hampshire. We see a lot of early American kestrels showing up here during spring migration, and it tends to concentrate kestrels on their way south during fall migration. So this map would not be possible without eBird users like ourselves. And for those of you who are new to eBird, I welcome you to the eBird community, and know that your data is contributing to scientific products like this one. So without further ado, Phil, I'll turn it back over to you. I'll play the video of American kestrels if you want to narrate what's happening.
Great. Well, I think it's going to be subtitled, so I'll just sit back and enjoy it with the rest of you.
Okay, let me get that pulled up. Okay, I hope you all enjoyed that cute video. And that's what's happening here in the Monadnock region. Phil, perhaps you could just quickly weigh in on when we expect eggs might be laid this time of year, and then we can get to some questions.
Yeah, I mean, some of it we're still trying to find out the timing. So we have data that we know from partners in other states. But yeah, I think I'm sure eggs are laid at this point in many cases. So females should be incubating. The males will also take a turn incubating occasionally. So they both will play a role in the parenting. The males will start bringing food back to the females as well when she's busy incubating and tending to the young. She'll also make flights out and be bringing food back to the nests. By late June, early July, though, is when you could start seeing these young out of the nests. So be ready for that. But yeah, we're going to keep on learning more. And I see there were a lot of great questions coming in. I wondered if Brett or Susie wanted to direct some questions our way.
Yeah, I would be happy to do it. Susie had to step out. So there were a lot of nest box questions. So I'll start with a really basic first one, which is, do the Kestrels return to the same box each year? The same birds in the same box? Is that
It seems like not necessarily. They do return to the same landscapes. Oftentimes they come back to the areas where they were born, but there is a lot of competition. So I think there are situations where birds will be returning to the same box year after year, maybe arriving first and getting back there to defend any intruders is the way to do that. But with up to 6 surviving young at times, there are a lot of young kestrels that will be looking for spaces. However, the nesting success just isn't as strong as it was in past years.
Great. There were a couple of questions, including one from me, about the boxes on poles that you were saying were kind of the preferred setup. So wondering about, like, if you wanted to check on for banding those birds or see if there's eggs, is that something that you just don't do on those boxes that are on poles, or can they be raised and lowered, or only raised and lowered when there's no birds in them?
Yeah, the system that Steve Wheeler uses does have a way of lowering the box to do monitoring a lot easier than 15 feet up on a ladder. It still requires being on a ladder. And we leave that to the trained professionals, the licensed banders. They need federal permits. So there will be some monitoring of kestrels that Steve will likely do again this summer. Potentially some of our birds, if we have success, could be part of that project. So another reason to monitor some of the boxes in the Monadnock region that we know about, especially when it comes time for young to be hatching. Usually the young are banded at around 20 days of age, and it will take them about a month to fledge the nest. So that's the best time. They're big enough at that point, and they won't fly off prematurely either. So yeah, good question. And did that answer that question well?
Yeah, for sure. Another question was, how far apart do nest boxes need to be? I'm sure we're all familiar with Bluebird boxes that are you can see a number of them not that far apart from each other. Is that true for kestrels, or is it like one per field for kestrels?
Seems like not in our area. Yeah, it's there is a spatial constraint for sure. It may have to do with fields and available habitat patches, but I've read that a half mile is the bare minimum that kestrels would typically use, a half mile apart. So if our two are 0.64 miles apart, we could potentially have 2 pair in Hancock.
Great. And then Francie was wondering, when we get to the nest box part, when we've identified locations that could use them, is that something that the Harris Center is planning to be able to provide for people, or are you not or are people going to build their own or get their own nest boxes, or are you not sure about that yet?
Good question. We're still working out that part. We do have a couple of very capable volunteers who've offered their services in constructing boxes. And really building the right box makes it a lot easier. So you don't have to do replacement and maintenance. And if you have a faulty box that leaks, for example, it's not going to be good for the kestrels. So doing it right from the start, getting the right design in place, and something that's easy to monitor and manage is going to be really important. Another criteria of that is we want to be able to manage these boxes ultimately. So finding places that researchers can access year after year, especially if there is competition from starlings. The European starling is a potential cause of decline in kestrels because they compete for the same holes. They're very aggressive. They will drive out kestrels at times. So, sometimes starlings will have to be excluded, or the box will have to be moved to a location further from a wooded edge. And that will typically keep starlings away, and mice and squirrels, which also will nest in boxes closer to the wood line. These are things that are going to reduce the availability of usable boxes for kestrels. So yeah, more coming on that. Good question, Francie. And yeah, this will be the chance to identify some of those fields. So yeah, give us some suggestions where you think kestrels occur and put those in eBird.
And Kathleen was asking about box design information. I don't know if there's a link that is something easy to pop in the chat to what's recommended, or if that's something else that is kind of forthcoming. You're still figuring that part out.
There are so many, and I'm sure there are reasons for a variety of designs. Certain landscapes will facilitate different types of designs too. So in our area, yeah, if you simply want to go out and build a box, I think maybe I would refer to the Cornell page for nest boxes. I don't have the link available, but maybe somebody can pop that in. I think there are several that will work. Basically, what has to happen is the hole diameter has to be right for a kestrel, and the floor opening has to be about 10 inches at least. And there has to be a certain amount of height, and I think it might be 14 inches in height, but I don't know offhand. Yeah, all these different designs. I think we will be able to come up with a standard box, especially one that's easy to open and clean at the right size, at the right side of the box. So yeah, forthcoming. Good questions.
All right, so I think there's two last questions that just came in. We're running a little over time, so just the last two, which I think might be quick. Brian was asking, can the boxes be put in the same fields as Bluebird boxes?
Yes, Bluebirds will occasionally use kestrel boxes. Probably not too often, but if they have boxes, they can do okay. Will kestrels impact bluebirds? A lot of people have that question. It's not going to be their favored prey. I think it's bluebirds and bobolinks are a little bit on the larger side, so there should be compatibility generally. However, it is another predator in the field that could put additional pressures. So if that's your priority bird, you may want to think twice about a kestrel box.
And George is wondering, given how far apart these nest boxes and territories are, whether he's in Stoddard and says there's osprey, if they're wondering, like, would osprey harass kestrels or other raptors in that same zone? Is there a concern about larger raptors preying on these smaller raptors?
I'm glad you brought that up, George. Ospreys are not, from what I have read, known to harass and impact kestrels negatively. Yeah, kestrels do attack larger raptors like red-tailed hawks and other things that might be a threat to them. But there's a direct predation issue with several species of raptors on kestrels. Cooper's hawk is implicated in declines in kestrels in certain landscapes. Hawk Mountain study has shown that in southeast Pennsylvania, Cooper's hawks are putting that negative pressure on kestrels, really to the detriment of kestrels in wintertime. So yeah, there are considerations, and the best way to avoid that is, from what I've learned, putting the boxes in a landscape that's far enough from the woods, but that allows the kestrel to have some amount of cover not too far away from the entrance hole of the box. So so having a flight line where there's safety somewhere maybe 100, 200 feet away could be a good thing. But forested edges within 200 meters, negative impact of kestrels. So try to go as far out in that middle of that field. Also placement and direction of the nest hole, something I didn't cover, should be generally southeast facing most of the time, because that's the side that gets the morning sun, warms up. They need that in the early spring, and they need the cool later in the summer.
Great to have you all on board, and thank you all, and hopefully see you in a field somewhere looking at some kestrels.
See you in the field. Thanks.
Bye.